so you've already heard my spiel, but we're gonna hear it again, and you're gonna laugh at my jokes. It's gonna be great. Thank you. I'm Felicia, I'll be your MC today. I'm also a local film producer, filmmaker, director, editor, actor, you know, independent film stuff. We all do kind of everything, right? All right, so I have a question. How many of you have never been to AFMX? This is your first year. Raise your hand. Woo-hoo. Awesome, welcome. Well, AFMX, for those of you who don't know, is in their 12th year of this film festival, which is incredible. Let's give them a round of applause. Okay, so a few things this year AFMX has. We have 81 films that were selected into the film festival, 40 events throughout the whole entire festival, 6 venues, 7 center stage conversations, and 24 film walks. I know, it's pretty impressive. Okay, so before we begin, I just want to give a big overall thank you to the sponsors, because without the sponsors, AFMX wouldn't be possible, so this year and past years, so thank you so much to all of you guys. And also, a big thank you to all of the volunteers. You'll see them. They are wearing the blue shirts, so if you guys see them out and about doing their business, just wave to them, give them a thumbs up, pat on the back, because they are working hard. So awesome, thank you guys. We are at the center stage conversation number 3, Demystifying Film Distribution with Ben Yennie. Give him a round of applause.
Oh gosh.
Today we have an amazing moderator. For those of you who don't know, her name is Karen Criswell. She's got an extraordinary bio. Let me tell you about her. She is Vice President of Operations for DreamWorks Studios. Karen strategically and operationally supported the teams behind a slate of interactive games, music developmental deals, narrative films, and television productions that occurred during her 18-year tenure. Her time at the studio included 3 Best Picture Oscars for American Beauty, Gladiator, and A Beautiful Mind. That's pretty impressive, guys. Give her a round of applause. Karen left the studio in 2014 to become an independent production consultant for her company, Concept Films. That's Concept with a K. During that time, she has completed various creative and developmental work for films, television, documentaries, and emerging new media. Karen is currently engaged in producing compelling stories for the screen with a focus on unrepresented voices. So give it up for Karen.
Hello, everyone. How are we doing today? So I think we're all really excited to have Ben Yennie back again this year. I don't know if any of you saw last year's conversation with him, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about him, and then we're going to dive right into it because he's got a lot of really great information. So Ben Yennie is an experienced executive producer working primarily in marketing and distribution with experience in packaging and finance. He's worked with stars like Danny Trejo, Keith David, Joel McHale, Felicia Day, Tom Lennon, Claudia Christian, and many, many more. Most notably, Ben is the executive producer of the feature film Tim Travers and the Time Traveler's Paradox, directed by Stimson Sneed and slated for release in 2024, and it's currently on the festival circuit. Ben has been significantly involved in or had a hand in over 80 plus feature films. Please give him a big welcome round of applause.
Thank you. Tim Travers is actually 2025 now. But
Well, 2024 is almost over.
Yes. So yeah, honestly, demystifying independent film distribution is a better name, but it is important to both understand it if you are a filmmaker, because if you don't understand distribution, it's extremely difficult to make money as a filmmaker, and if you can't make money as a filmmaker, it's really hard to make it a career. So let's dive right in. The first and potentially most important element of all of this is to understand that film is not entirely creative. It is equal parts business and creative aspects of the film. If you don't have good marketing, if you don't have a solid business plan and a solid team that includes reputable distributors on top of the script and the overall production quality of the film. It's going to be very, very difficult for you to get meaningful distribution that actually returns your initial investment or your investor's money. So, with that in mind, let's move on to distribution. What's the difference between film marketing and distribution? It's relatively simple. Distribution is the act of making the film available to the end consumer to buy. And marketing is convincing those people to buy it, as well as other people in the chain. There's a lot of that, and we'll get into that more later. It's important to understand what the basic aspects of a film distribution agreement is. First and most importantly is the compensation. How do you get paid? Are you getting paid up front? Are you taking a revenue share? Is it a mix of both? Most of the time, distributors and sales agents will take what's known as a recoupable expense. That just means that they're going to put money into your film that they will need to recoup before paying you. It's not something that you have to pay out up front unless you're in a really bad deal. Then there's the term, which just means how long is this agreement going to be in force for. And one notable thing about the term, which we can go into a little more later, most sales agency agreements, not distribution agreements, will actually allow the sales agent to sell beyond their term. So if it's a 5-year term, a sales agent will be able to sell it to distributors for 10 years and things like that. And it's in pretty much every sales agreement I've ever seen. Territory. Where can they sell to? A common thing you see on a bad distribution agreement is the universe. Saw that last week.
And in perpetuity.
And that's, yes, that would be the term. But yeah, in perpetuity, and then on media rights, which is a different thing, which just means what different media forms can you sell it with, like, can you sell it on physical media? We'll go into this more later, but DVDs versus video on demand, all of that. And then my favorite term in all contracts is all rights in perpetuity throughout the universe in all media now known or hereafter devised.
Right. That's the one you want to watch out for.
Yeah, avoid that one. The languages. What languages are they selling? This one's less commonly used now than it was, but it still factors in almost all agreements. It just is something that honestly your sales agent's going to have to worry about a lot more than you are. And then finally, exit conditions. How do you get out of this contract? And it's not always as simple as they didn't live up to their agreement. Okay, great. What's the remedy? It gets really complicated here, and it's one thing that you really need to be focusing on as a filmmaker. I don't think it's in this deck, but in general, you want to have bankruptcy clauses so that your rights automatically revert if the sales agent or distributor goes bankrupt. Key person clauses are great, which means that if the person you were dealing with, who you developed a relationship with at this entity, leaves the company, you have the right to you have a path to get your rights back. That one's harder to enforce or harder to get these days. And then there are a few others, but those are probably the most important. And also just stories on those. Like, there was an epidemic for a while. It's not really that widespread anymore, but for a while, sales agencies would go bankrupt, and because there weren't these bankruptcy clauses, the rights to their films would go up for auction, and then they would buy back their own rights under a different company name, and then all of the debts were gone because of bankruptcy. So that's thankfully been clamped down a lot, but that was happening a lot in I believe it was the 80s, 90s, and early aughts. But like I said, it is, I have not been keeping up, sorry. Yeah, so that's where we are now. Now, like we said, compensation is a big part of this agreement, is a big part of any contract and any licensing agreement. It's important you understand how, as a filmmaker, you're going to get paid. And in order to do that, it's helpful to understand how distributors get paid. So how filmmakers get paid by distributors are minimum guarantees, which is a set amount up front and then a share of revenue past that set amount after the distributor has recouped their expenses. A license fee, which is a flat amount, which is all you'll ever get from it. And then a revenue share, which is also functionally a royalty, which is a share of profits. Generally, the revenue share is after the distributor has recouped their expenses. And we forgot to mention it up front, but you will all be receiving this deck in an email after this presentation. So then the way distributors tend to make money is, first and foremost, their commission, recoupable expenses. And then the other one, which you have to be very careful of, is service fees. Sometimes people working in distribution will charge a set amount up front for services. This is actually really common among producers reps these days. It's not a model I like, and it's not a model I use specifically for brokering as a representative. I do use it if I'm doing business planning and other things like that, because I too have bills to pay, and I can't give 60 hours of upfront time without compensation for 4 years. I don't think most people could. Moving on to media right types. This is not complete. This gets wibbly wobbly as we go on, but in broad strokes, there's theatrical rights, which can include traditional theaters, drive-ins, but also community screenings, churches, and other. And finally, there's educational screenings, which is generally if you sell the right to exhibit your film, most often documentaries, at a educational facility, and generally there's a flat license fee when you do that. Then there's physical media, which would include Blu-ray, DVD, VHS, Betamax, Laserdisc, and actually I have had contracts that said HD-Cam and Betamax were actually specifically called out on delivery lists. Doesn't happen anymore really, but until shockingly recently, parts of Eastern Europe still did it primarily for television.
I was going to say that's probably mostly for other countries, not the United States, yeah.
Specifically as sales, and most of the time the sales agent would replicate it for you at a fee. But
Gotcha.
yeah, and then there's broadcast television, which would include, or just broadcast rights, which would include pay TV, linear TV, cable, which is functionally cable, over the air, network, and then FAST, which is free ad support television. And you could, in theory, put this under VOD because it's still delivered by the internet. But since it is a constant stream, it's moving towards the broadcast line. VOD is video on demand, and then of video on demand there are multiple right types: transactional, subscription, ad-supported, TVOD, SVOD, AVOD. If you buy or rent something on Amazon that you pay money for, that's transactional. If you watch something on Netflix, that's subscription. If you watch something on Tubi TV, that's ad-supported. Then finally, there's ancillary, which covers basically everything else. Most commonly are airline and closed-circuit television, which would generally include cruise ships. I've seen it include prisons, which was a weird one. Then there's educational, not single screening, to make it available through a academic institution's library or something of the sort. Merchandising, most sales agents will not take the merchandising rights. If they do, it's non-exclusive. If they try to take it exclusively, go to a different company. And then finally, soundtrack, same as merchandising before.
I had a quick question
Yep.
and clarification. So when they do a lot of these different rights, don't they then also then have some sort of editing functionality? I was thinking specifically about airlines and prisons. I'm sure that's all spelled out in these deals as well, correct?
Yes, there's normally a clause that I can't remember the exact language on right now, but it functionally means that they have all the rights they need to localize it, is generally what it would be. And most of the time you will not get any say in how they edited it.
Right.
So, worth noting. Also, just because it's fun, and I was watching something else this morning, there was a time where Netflix had an exclusive deal on the App Store of Xbox 360 so that they could only have the app on Xbox 360 for all gaming consoles. But Netflix, being the cheeky buggers they are, skirted that by sending a disc to anybody who asked for one for Wii and PS3 at the time. And that's how they did it, because technically that was a physical media right, not an exclusive app download right, which I find endlessly entertaining, because
one of the many ways, the creative ways that the industry will work around whatever contract they sign with you.
Exactly. Going on to territories. Generally, territories are broken into two parts. It's regions and territories. A region encompasses multiple territories. Most of the time, all of the meaningful contract language is around territory, not region, but it just helps to parse it when you're actually doing the business of international sales. Also, I should have said this earlier, but I'm not a lawyer, so don't take any of this as legal advice, and check with yours on any level of a distribution agreement. There's around there's actually a bit over, I think it's 212 or 16 different designated territories for independent media rights. Almost all the time they are bundled in some way, shape, or form. Most of the time when you sell USA rights, you sell what we call North America rights, which means USA and Canada, and Mexico is its own territory on that. But most sales agency sell sheets are somewhere around 40 to 50 territories, not 200. Sometimes territories will be segmented by language, because because sometimes you'll sell French-speaking Canada with France, as well as French-speaking Belgium, and I don't want to go too into the weeds on that, but it is it is worth noting and understanding, basically because I think the more you understand about something like this, even if you're not going to use all of the knowledge, it informs the knowledge that you actually use. And most of the time, sales agents do not sell your entire, the film to the entire world. It's generally 8 to 10 sales per film, and it's also, it's to the point that if somebody sells the entire world, it gets around the market, and pretty much every sales agent knows someone did it. That's, a friend of mine did that like 10 years ago, and he frankly grew his company 3x off that one film.
Off of one film.
And
Yeah.
But the
the world is sort of split up into a bunch of puzzle pieces, and how they get interwoven for each particular project is unique to that project. We were talking the last panel around entrepreneurship about the fact that there's no cookie cutter plan for how all of this will lay out for your particular film project.
Yeah, and these days, the only time you're going to make large minimum guarantee level sales is in the first 2 years from when you release a film, which most often means like whatever year your film says on IMDb.
Right.
So if you started screening in festivals at IMDb in 2024, you need to make the bulk of your minimum guarantee level sales after or within those first 2 years, before the end of 2025. And after that point, a lot of sales agents these days are working with the filmmaker to aggregate the film and just get it out directly wherever they can. The biggest issue with this, and why they don't do it up front, is that there's no localization that takes place and no localized marketing, which means that the numbers are going to be pretty small. But it's better than not having it there at all. And once you get it on AVOD, ad-supported video on demand, you also cut down on piracy a lot. Right. So that's part of why you do it.
Well, AVOD's where a lot of independent filmmakers
where
are
you make
getting
pretty
their
much all your money right now.
Right.
Yeah. People don't like buying movies anymore. It's sad, but it's true.
Yeah. There's too many streaming platforms. They've ruined it.
There are too many adequate alternatives that they can watch for free.
Yeah.
Basically. So yeah. Now, how you get paid in the broad sense, which is minimum guarantee, license, or revenue share. Calculating that revenue share gets kind of complicated, and that's where the term the waterfall comes in. And that's all the steps it takes for an independent film to have money flow to the filmmaker. And you see that big slide there? That's kind of a worst case scenario, but it's not entirely uncommon either. From going all the way from the customer to the platform to the aggregator or servicer to the distributor then takes their commission, then pays their expenses. Yes, I said that correctly. The distributor pays the sales agent. The sales agency takes their commission and then pays their expenses, and then pay the producer's rep if there is one, and then finally the filmmaker. That's a lot of steps. And I did do a blog on my site about exactly how a single dollar trickles down to you on that. I don't remember the number, but you can find it in the search function on my blog. But it's more than half, comfortably, that goes to that, because even just the platform fee is generally 30 to 50%, depending on which platform it is. And just as a note that if your sales agent isn't asking you for tax documentation to pay you, that is a little bit of a worry, because that means they might not be doing everything on the up and up, and you do actually want them to do that. So I've had filmmakers get mad at me for making them give me a W-9 before I pay them, and I don't really care. I need the W-9.
Which is the good business side of things, because you need to have that W-9 if you want to claim anything on your taxes.
Exactly.
So to show that you paid them. And that's, again, we were talking a lot about the business side of things, and that completely overlaps into that world. But it also shows from your slide that filmmakers don't make a lot of money, because everybody takes a big, huge chunk out of that pie before it ever gets to the actual creator.
Yeah, it's true. It makes it a very difficult business to make sustainable. And keep in mind, when I say the investors don't get paid until the producer does. So there are all of these other entities that get paid before the investor does as well, which is difficult, basically. And it's a hard sell, and it's not something that is... I don't know if there's a super viable solution to that, but there is... It also doesn't sit right in a lot of senses.
I have a quick question, because we were talking about this earlier about, and I don't know if you're familiar with the model that Sing Sing, the film, has taken. They did a whole equity pay and equity sort of share program with that independent film, and everyone got paid the same day rate all the way down, and everyone got equity in the film. They just premiered at Toronto this year. They screened at South by Southwest. And A24 picked them up in between Toronto and South by, and they've already gotten equity. So how does that, like, that's like a new model with a much faster turnaround on the equity to the actual filmmakers. Is it because A24 financed that equity return and bought them out?
That's the biggest part, is that they actually got a big check from A24.
Gotcha.
That's actually not that different from just geting back-end points.
Right,
really.
But everyone on the film got it.
Yeah.
I think that was the biggest.
Yeah.
The biggest plus is that everyone made the same day rate. Everyone got back-end points.
Yeah, no, that's true. There's something similar in co-ops, and getting the term, but various different collaborative business models that are kind of emerging in other industries that sounds a lot like.
Yeah.
So yeah, now
they probably borrowed it from.
They probably did.
Borrowed it from some other industry, but I think it's an interesting model for independence.
I completely agree. This slide here is complicated, but It is functionally a flowchart of how you can of who can actually deliver a film and how you can actually pitch each of these entities. So if you're a standard filmmaker, you can't just walk up to Apple TV and say, hey, put my movie out there. You have to at least go through an aggregator or someone like that. Most of the time, the way it flows is from the producer to either a sales or producer rep, to an international sales agent, to a territorial buyer, to an aggregator or servicer, to platforms, exhibitors, and retailers, to the end consumer. The fastest path you can do is generally self-distribution, which is straight to the aggregator, which then goes to the platforms, which then go to the end consumer. If you rent your own theater, you can go straight to the exhibitor, which then goes to the end consumer. There are a lot of steps in this process, and this is something that's worth looking at, and this is something that you can look at in your own time when we email you the whole thing.
Which is why we're sending you all this information, because it's a lot.
It is a lot, yes. And this one in particular, just look at later. It's not great for presenting, but great for understanding, and it's basically an extrapolation of the previous slide. So now that you understand what a distribution deal looks like, it's worth talking about how you actually get one. Now, before we get too far into this is really hard. You guys specialized in making movies, not this archaic legalese and very, very strange relationships you have to work in this business. So it's wise to get help. That's my website. I have a submit tab. And it's not just me that you should go for. You should definitely get an attorney on all of this as well. This is something, honestly, I only have really come to appreciate in the last year. The first audience for your film is the buyers. The distributors who will decide whether or not to take it to market. And if they don't like the film, your film will not get to market in their territory unless you self-distribute, and most of the time you're not going to have the marketing resources to bring to bear on that. We pitched Tim Travers to more than 200 distributors globally before we got a single offer. If you watch it, you might see part of why, but it is something that's worth getting into your head, and that there is still a lot more gatekeepers than we like to admit.
Well, and I also think one of the things I consult independent young filmmakers about a lot is adding a line item to your budget that is particularly for marketing to distributors. Because, you can have a great budget to get it physically shot and done, but as Ben's mentioning, if you don't know how to market or can't spend the money to market, even if you get accepted to Sundance, you've got to have the money to do a marketing campaign at Sundance, or being at Sundance will be not worthless, but it won't be nearly as worthwhile as it could be if you had that marketing plan in place. So that's one of the things that's really critical that a lot of filmmakers leave out is that money to do exactly what he's talking about, which is to pitch that because it costs money. It costs money to print materials or to create materials. It costs money to go to markets. It costs AFM's coming up in November in Vegas, which is cheaper than... It's a little cheaper than LA, but not much.
Not on the AFM front. Yeah. On the lodging and airfare front, yes, but AFM itself is still charging him.
Sure, but again, lodging and airfare, all these things you have to put that into your budget and into your plan for your project, so that all of this fabulous information that Ben's giving you is worthwhile.
You're right, and just since we brought up Sundance, I believe it's somewhere between 2 and 3% of films that are submitted to Sundance get in, and that's not exactly a secret. It's kind of just well known. What people don't think about as much is only about 10% of films that get into Sundance get a distribution deal out of Sundance. So how you find a sales agent? First, as with anything, do your research. And what I mean by this is look into sales agents who have distributed other films similar to yours in the past. You can generally do this with an IMDb Pro subscription and just go straight to their, just look at that other film and you can find out who distributed it from there. And you just make a list. You find a lot of similar films from the past at least 2 years old, because that's the data you're actually going to be able to get, and probably not older than 7 years old, because it's not meaningful in terms of metrics anymore. Also, a lot of those companies might no longer exist. And it's important to be realistic here. Just because you made a film about a wedding doesn't mean it's comparable to My Big Fat Greek Wedding. That's just... but
It's true.
Yeah. So try to keep budget as a parameter of that, and that'll help you find a better distributor, because Lionsgate won't take everything. That's just the reality.
Well, and just clarification. So right now, what is the budget range that the independent filmmakers are really having the best success with distribution? Because I know there's kind of a lot of talk about it, but I'm just curious about your thoughts as we're on the budget front.
Depends on what you mean by success.
In terms of like, our distributors look like, I have been told that if you're doing something, do it in the 2 to 3 million range and not in the 8 to 12 million dollar range, in that moderate, that we're in the lower range or the higher range for like studio temples, that there's not a lot of purchasing going on in that 12 to 15 to 18 million dollar range.
That's about right. The range that I've been getting a lot of requests for, and I'm not going to say who, but it's actually like 4 of them, are 15 to 30 million. And they said with A-list talent. And when I asked what they meant, they said somebody your grandmother in France knows. So that's tricky, even on $15 million budget.
So if you don't have that, you don't go make a 10, 15, 20 million dollar movie.
Yeah. And I mean, that's probably your best chance at making sure that money gets back. But how do you get that money first? And also, how do you get that talent in your film? It's I guess, yeah, it's I was debating between Catch-22 and Ouroboros. But yeah, and then the other thing you should do is, at least once in your life as a filmmaker, you should attend all 3 of the major film markets. And you should probably attend your local one first, your local one more than once. You don't necessarily need to go every year, but you should go every couple of years just to maintain relationships and things like that. But you should go to every major film market once. And as of right now, that is the American film market, which now is in Vegas, so it's super close. The European film market, which is in Berlin, as part of Berlinale, and then the Marché du Film, which is part of the Cannes Film Festival. And you should go to each of those 3 at least once. Honestly, the most affordable one, super weirdly, is Berlin. It's cheaper than AFM, which is still weird to me. Maybe it's different here, but at least for me in Philadelphia, it's cheaper.
Well, and for your planning calendars, AFM is coming right up in November. The Berlinale, Berlin Film market that is February, and then Cannes is in May.
Yeah, and unless you're actually trying to get into sales and distribution, you don't need to go in the same year. You just should go to each at some point throughout your career. Each one has its kind of own flavor, too.
The other thing you can do, as like a side note, is get on their mailing lists too, because they send out a lot of information, and that may make a decision for you about what looks like it might be a more interesting year for you to attend. Like some people may go this year to AFM because it is closer. We can drive there from here. You can drive from LA. It cuts down on costs. So there may be people that go this year for the first time because they changed the venue location. So it's good to be on mailing lists for all of these organizations, because it will give you kind of that, it'll help ease you into the mire of the markets.
You're totally right. So I know I'm a distributor at a film festival, but you probably won't get distribution at a film festival. There are a lot of less than reputable distributors who will try to get films out of film festivals, and they're the ones who won't actually attend the film festivals. They'll just send you an email saying, hey, we saw you got into pick a film festival. We love those guys. can you send us your screener? We're interested in distribution. I've gotten some of those for Tim Travers recently. And a lot of times these distributors are not necessarily people you want to work with. It's fine to entertain the conversation. You should probably talk to them. It's good to talk to these people, even if it ends up that you don't go with them. Just understand that you need to look into these people. You need to do your due diligence. You need to call their previous filmmakers. And don't tell them which ones you're going to call. Just look at their IMDb and call them. That's not where you should be focusing as a filmmaker at a film festival anyway. You should be focusing on building the brand of your film so that when it does come time to get distribution, you'll be more successful at it. That means try to get press, engage with your core audience, and find advocates. That's probably the most important one.
I was just going to say, that's what I thought you would say. So
Yeah.
I agree 100%. Again, that comes back to that marketing for distribution budget line item that most people leave off of their budgets, so that you can do all of these things successfully. Because the more buzz you create and the more, sort of momentum that you build, I think that really there is a certain amount of efficacy to the fact that vibe and momentum and buzz really do make a difference when you walk in to talk with a distributor about the fact that you would like for them to distribute your project. It's kind of like you're right, you kind of need that wave to ride that wave, and it really takes a hard push once the film is done, which is really hard. It's hard because you've spent all this time and energy and focus and money on making the film, and then you gotta dig deep and find the next big hard push because all of this is coming. And I think that's something that you should plan for and strategize for when you're planning out your entire production schedule, that you're going to have enough energy to pursue this fully the way that you need to get your project distributed.
Yeah,
it's
I could
making
not
me
agree more.
tired just thinking about it.
Yeah, no, the producer burnout is real. Sorry, I got a text.
I have done
Yeah.
it. I've done it. I've produced things, and then I get done with producing it, and I'm like, I have no desire to go out and market my movie now that I finished it. And so that's why a team is so important. Get people on your team so that it's a relay race, so you can hand off the baton to other producers or other people on your team and keep that constant push going.
And this slide will probably age like fine milk. But the good and bad deal points, this is a shifting target.
Yeah.
But good, I've got here both distributors and international sales. They're very much not the same. Good for an international sales agent is 5 to 7 years, maybe even 3 to 5 years. Too short is not in your best interest. If it's more than 10 years for a sales agent, it's a bad sign. Recoupable expenses for a sales agent. Good is $5,000 to $10,000. There are expenses involved in taking a film to market. Just attending markets every year, not even as a full exhibitor, I pay somewhere in the vicinity of $12,000. This is without getting offices. This is sharing offices and dealing with stuff because I'm not a direct sales agent. I do more in distribution than sales. I don't need to get a booth. I share with somebody else, mainly so I have a place to put my stuff, and then I bring stuff back to them. But the recoupable expenses to a level are very reasonable. They should be shared among all of the films on their catalog,
Right.
probably put very heavily on the first 2 years.
Is
of
that
those films.
$12,000 for all 3 festivals?
That's total for all
Total?
3.
Yeah,
And I do
okay.
it super cheap.
Okay.
That's a
The budget, that's the budget.
Yeah, that's
budget.
me. That's
the
just
low,
what
the
I
low
that's
budget option.
yeah. So if I were actually getting an office and properly paying for advertisements, it'd be more like 30 to 35. somewhere in
Is
that
there an
range.
average of number of films that a sales agent will typically take so that you kind of know how that's being parsed out besides your project if you have a sales agent?
Yeah, most of the time it should be somewhere between 5 and 7 per market per
Okay.
each of the 3 major, or maybe 10 a year, somewhere in that range.
Okay.
Because your first year of sales it's going to take almost a full market cycle, by which I mean if you make a market premiere at EFM in February, It's really rare somebody will actually buy. Somebody might start buying at con, but you'll really start selling at AFM.
Got it.
That's just how that happens. And then in general, the sales agent commission should be 20 to 25%, somewhere in there. If it's more than 30, as a sales agent, that's really bad. North American distribution, and the reason I'm focusing on North American here is because it's fairly common for American filmmakers to hold back North American rights and deal directly with the distributor. And it's the same for like a Croatian filmmaker dealing with Croatian rights. Your home territory, it's generally fairly common that you hold back your own rights. Because it's the market I know best, it would be good is 7 to 10 years. Pretty much all international sales hit the 10-year mark right now. Again, this slide will age like fine milk.
I have a quick question.
Yes?
Because what happens if you get into a 7 to 10 year deal with a sales agent, but then it becomes very apparent after a while that they are not making any headway with your film, which could be of all manner of reasons. It could be the film, but what if it feels like it's their approach? How hard is it to get out of those deals?
So it depends on the deal.
Okay.
But in general, what clause that I put in my contract is a easy out clause, which is if you're just not happy with us after 2 years, I'll give you your right to that. That's just where it is. It really shouldn't be less than 2 years because you got full market.
Yeah, it takes a while.
Yeah, it takes a while for everything to come in. It's just, I know that feels like forever, but it's basically the only way that clause to work. The recoupable expenses, this is on top, these recoupable expenses are more dependent on the size of your film than the other points on this slide. It is, if you made a $200,000 or less film, you really don't want them to do more than 10,000 unless they're doing a theatrical, at which point you could maybe go up. As my model right now, my intent is to do 10,000 in expenses for North America. No, I'm actually able to be a distributor again. And then, unless I'm doing theatrical, at which point it's going to be 25, because there's a lot more involved in a theatrical. And I'm cheaper than most people there. My brand is the guerrilla rep. It's just kind of in my bones at this point. Even as a sales agent, when I've consulted on things like this, if it's more than 50, I'm really hesitant to take the deal unless they're paying me with $300,000 up front, in which point I'll be more likely to entertain. But in general, you don't want sales expenses for North American distribution to be more than 100,000. I think you should be able to tell one. Now, commission, it should be probably 20 to 30% if they're charging recoupable expenses. There is a new trend in sales companies where they will not charge any recoupable expenses and just do a 50-50 split on all of it, which can be advantageous. I still kind of feel the traditional, but it's so dependent on what film you have. I still like the old way better, personally. However, if you are paying more than $10,000 in expenses, you should make sure you get what's called a producer's corridor fee. And that means that, like the waterfall earlier, it was when the distributor gets the money, they take 25% commission, then 75% to expenses. The way I do things, I have done things in the past and likely will in the future, is a corridor, which would mean 25% to me as commission, 25% to you as a corridor, 50% to expenses. Once the expenses are met, 25 to me, 75 to you.
Interesting. If you do if with this new model, this 50-50 deal, what's the accountability for what they've spent money on? Is there any, or is it just you're supposed to take it on faith? Because I really want that to.
It doesn't. it doesn't matter as much on that because there is no expenses. It's 50% of everything they bring in. So that's from dollar one.
But that's assuming that they're actually spending money on your behalf, right? Or
I mean, so are recoupable expenses to a level. That's it.
it's coming from my faith, but at least.
There's this business, any partnership, legally it's not partnership, but any business like this does requires a degree of trust.
Yeah.
And there is, at some point you're going to have to take a leap of faith that you trust you're dealing with. And you can't
With
do
your
that.
attorney's help.
Yes, very much with your attorney's help. And also, Ted Hope said something like, an uncomfortable amount of time ago that has stuck with me, which is no distribution deal is better than bad distribution. Especially, certainly, and I say that almost every time I'm on stage.
They will take the calculated risk, but definitely bring your attorney into the company.
Oh, always bring your attorney in. So, never don't have it. Attorneys are expensive, but not having one is more expensive. Okay, and the terms you can negotiate on a distribution deal. Because you can't actually negotiate everything, and sometimes it makes more sense to not negotiate on something that you think is the obvious place to go, but if you negotiate around the edges of it, you'll end up in a better position, assuming your distributor's on the level, which, again, call it freebies clients. You want it between 5 and 10 years, you can normally negotiate it to that range. If you can't, frankly, question whether you should deal with them. Territories. At least get greater oversight in your home territory. If you have a path to distribution for it, maybe try to hold it back. And they'll ask you why, when you should tell them why. If you want to distribute yourself, it can work, but just keep in mind, you have to do all your marketing yourself. You have to do all of the expenses related to aggregation yourself. You have to do all of your art, you have to do all of your trailers, you have to do all of your publicity, you have to do everything yourself. And often it will lower the overall sales value for other territories because if you get a good US distributor, international territories will know that it'll be marketed better in the US and they'll pay more because they don't have to do as much. So, yeah, that's something you can normally negotiate. Exit conditions, we've been on this a few times. Lately, bankruptcy clauses are common. If they're not already in there, if you say you want a bankruptcy clause, if they say anything other than, oh, good point, that should be in there. Just
Walk away.
go walk away, yeah.
Walk away.
Performance, again, any meaningful term on performance is going to be more than 2 to 3 years, and it just gets tricky to negotiate, but you can try. That's why I favor an easy out.
I have a quick question on that point too. So let's say you get your first deal, your first distribution deal.
That's it.
And how many years did you say that you want it to be for?
Distribution, most of the time for international is 10 years. Domestic is more wibbly wobbly. There's more room for negotiation.
Sure.
I mean, but that could be more like 5 to 10. It's less than 5.
And then after that expires, does that because I've had a film out now on distribution for 20 years. I think now we're it feels like we're re-upping our agreement every 3 or 4 years. It seems like the window has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter than when the film has been out there. Does that seem to be true, or is that just maybe a variance for our particular project?
So no, actually that's a very interesting use case. Most of the agreements that I see on this now will be 3 to 5, or probably more 5 to 7 years, and then auto extend annually beyond that. And that's just how that's dealt with now, and there are conditions on how you cancel the auto extension. Now, the other thing that's important to note here is once it's already been out, it's a lot harder to sell it.
Right.
And it's just do not think that you'll just be able to go back to square one if it's already been out everywhere. I have lost 5-figure deals because a filmmaker put a film on Amazon in a territory, and they would no longer buy it, full stop. This has happened to me.
Just less
Yeah.
and less. Like, I think AVOD's kind of our last bastion of where
Yeah.
we'll wind up with. I mean, I'm happy that it still has a little bit of life left in it. It's just on Prime for a while. So,
Yeah.
but anyway, yeah, I was just curious because it does feel like, you know, your options get slimmer and slimmer and slimmer the longer the film is getting distribution.
If it's older than about 5 years, you get put into, really, it could be, at this point, it could even be like 3 years, depending on the side of the film.
Yeah.
But you get put into either third window or catalog status. And that third window is not quite as limiting as catalog status, but once you're in catalog status, what it means is your sales agent's going to sell it in a block of anywhere between 5 and 50 films to a single distributor and get maybe $200 per film, which means functionally nothing to you. And 200 is a little bit exaggeration, might be more like that, but it's still not going to end up with all that much for you. It's great for the sales agent.
Right.
It's not, yeah. So that would basically be the thing there. And one thing, if you take only a few things away from this slide, from this presentation, one of them should probably be that films are not evergreen. It is your film will lose value significantly after 2 years. This is not something you have decades to work on. You should definitely have the ability to audit. You should read the reporting section very carefully. That's what I mean by financial oversight. I could ramble on about that for probably 45 minutes. So if you have questions, that's probably a better way to address that. And then bring your creative oversight into your home territory. Like one film, distributors retail films all the time. And sometimes they're really dumb. Okay, she's not going to care if I say this. So there's a film that I represented called The Restaurant, which was a great film that you can ever work in the service industry you should seek out and find, because it's basically a horror comedy about a about a waiter who is taking out the trash and giving it a shift, and then all of a sudden there's this big screaming from the basement, and then he finds out that the reason that the failing restaurant has been revitalized is because the manager of the restaurant has been feeding the bad patrons to the demon basement.
How does that?
Who's been eating them and then using his power to grow the restaurant. And I love the premise. It's such a big movie, but the distributor called it the Devil's Restaurant, which is a problem because there's no devil in the movie. And there's also and the art was completely mismatched. The filmmaker lost friends over it, even though they had nothing to do with it. It's a problem, but that's why you want to negotiate greater oversight, and it needs to be something more than you should actually have to get approval on title changes. That's something that most of the time you should be able to negotiate. If it's
Your cover art.
you're never going to get final say on that.
Okay.
You can get input, but you can't get final say. There's a different film that we signed because it was a LGBTQ plus story about that was about a femophobic movie about a woman who decides, a couple of women who've been going through some hard times and have recently, and decide that by the end of the day, the other one's going to propose to this woman. And then the zombie apocalypse happens that day. So I work a lot in genre movies, there's a reason for it. So we sold it to a known distributor who works with this sort of content regularly. And we did it because they said, well, this just feels like a straight story too. It could just as easily be a straight story. And then they put two women in booty jorts and panties on the cover. And we had to fight that one. They ended up putting in torn wedding dressings that were just epic. And that was the best we can do. But
Right. I just remember from my days in the studio that the back and forth on many different territories and countries, and language for titles and what the translation was. It's a, so it's a whole thing, and you only get a limited say in what that will be.
Yeah, and that's unfortunately true. And you're going to get next to no say on the trailer unless they just decide not to change your trailer because you brought them a really good one. So
Find a good trailer editor. Add it to your budget.
no, actually, a good trailer editor is one of the most important people you can know. More the process of starting to talk to your sales agent is more a series of goals. First goal on first meeting is to establish rapport. So if you work with this person because you're going to be working heavily with this person for at least a year or two. Also going to be probably working with them at least lightly for another 5 to 10 years if it's going well. So you want to like this person. It not consciously or anything, but if you get on really well with your distributors, there's a chance they're going to put a little bit of extra juice in that. It's not that we plan it. It's just that we all know that the goal in front of what you go for. Like, it just,
and you're trusting them
Yeah.
to find the right deal for you.
Yeah.
They have to love your project and be a great advocate for the project.
Yes.
And you've got to make sure that you're picking the right choice. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck in a deal with somebody who's not really marketing the film the way you want it to be marketed to to find distribution. So I think it is super. I think it's probably one of the most important critical relationships that you have in filmmaking. Is who your sales agent is.
I completely agree with that. And then the other thing there is, if your sales agent has to spend a lot of time working with you and telling you things they've told you a few times already, that's less time they can be self-moving. So that's part of why a rapport is really important.
And you need to know if they're a good communicator.
Yeah.
And so you got to spend enough time with them to make sure that they're communicating clearly to you what they're doing, and that you get it, and that it's the right thing.
Yeah.
You can't do that in 5 minutes. You've got to relate. And again, goes back to what you were saying earlier about the due diligence of going out and really sussing out who these sales agents are, what they've repped in the past, what they've successfully repped in the past, and whether or not it's anything correlating to what you want them to do for you.
Completely. And just as an example of communication style, I'm significantly more reactive when it comes to filmmaker relations. If there's something I need to tell you, I will tell you as soon as it happens. I don't always reach out on a weekly basis just to say, hey, this little thing's happened. If you reach out to me, I'll respond to what's going on. I'm not necessarily saying that's a good thing. I've just learned that's how
That's your style.
So it's, yeah.
And I think filmmakers need to know that if they need somebody to kind of handle them a little bit and touch base with them every week, maybe that will be a great fit.
Yeah, and I'll do it more during the actual release, but if it's like that, so there's a long lag to when you pitch or place a film and when it actually comes out, and an even longer lag until you get paid.
Right.
It's just what it is. So if it's in one of those lag periods, I'm probably talking to other filmmakers about other stuff. And but I've never upset to hear from somebody. I'll just tell you what's going on. It's just, I don't think to reach out because eventually out there, they're selling me. But that's me. So
I've also heard about sales agents who, no matter how much you reach out to them, unless they have something to tell you, they just go radio silent, which doesn't really bode well for a filmmaker's confidence that their sales agent is doing what they want them to do, because they want them to respond, right? You're kind of paying them to be responsive to you. So I think that's a good trait.
Yeah, so it's just it's just, if I had more time, I would probably try to do weekly updates, but it's just, a lot of times I'd say, we're still waiting on this.
Well, you have so much, like you said, there's time periods where nothing really substantive is happening. It doesn't mean that you're not still on it, or that it's not moving forward, or that it's not working. It's just that that's just the process.
Yeah, no, totally. And then moving on from that though, the second goal is to establish that they've done their due diligence. So what I mean by that is, did they actually watch the freaking movie? The answer to that may surprise you. But I've worked with distributors in the past who didn't watch the movie until after they released it, which is...
What percentage do you guesstimate that is people out there currently do?
It used to be a lot higher. I think now it's more like 20 to 30%. So
Still pretty significant.
yeah. And it just depends a little bit. Maybe my figure's high, but it's more prevalent in the low budget sphere. And if they're what I call a schlock gunner, which just means they acquire as many as they can to release as many as they can as quickly as they can because they only 1 in 10 films makes money, so let's release 50 movies this year.
Assembly line.
Yeah.
The assembly line version.
Yeah. Or let's release 950 movies this year. Let's release 300 movies this year. It's this particular company, I'm thinking. Second.
Do you have a way to test? Because I would think that there are some people that will say, yes, I watched it, and...
Bring up a particular point in your movie that's towards the middle, that's towards the second third. So
Okay.
like right around the break into 2.
Okay, that makes sense.
For the break into 3, excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah, bring up something like that. But there's a chance they'll tell you, look, I skipped it. And if they're honest with you, that's not just necessarily bad. But
At least they're being honest.
but it's better than if they're lying about it. It's better than she watched the whole thing. But yeah, and often I've been guilty of that one, honestly. And then I've said, look, I'll watch it before we exit it, which is where it comes down. Sometimes I'm not that big a distributor when I still get 5 to 7 submissions a week. It's a lot. I can't.
Not to watch.
Yeah, it's just.
It's the same issue as like festival submissions. Right?
Yeah.
You get thousands of festival submissions.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know very many. I know a few, but I don't know very many programmers for major festivals that did thousands of submissions that watch them. I have a friend who does it. You watch this documentary. So I clung him because he watching 3 or 4 their documentaries, and the planning period is a lot.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then your third goal would be to understand their business model, which is basically, are they a high-touch prestige distributor, or are they a schlock gunner, or are they more of a reactive distributor as well, that they would take a decent number of films and they will do the best they can and try to, but if something starts to get traction, they'll build on that traction. That's what I've been more in the past, because the thing about prestige releasing is your entire company can go if one film flops in a way you don't expect. It's a tricky business. Your fourth goal here is to understand expectations. Your distributor should be very clear in telling you what they expect your film to do. It'll probably be a broad range, because frankly, sometimes things pop that you really don't expect to pop. It's happened to me, and that's why I take a wider selection of films than I used to, because sometimes things have just exploded that I didn't expect. And as a result for me, I would just say, look, here's what I intend to do, here's how I think it'll perform. I can't guarantee it, because sometimes things you really expect to just do gargantuanly well. Like, again, with Tim Drivers, 2 years ago, I would have been fighting distributors off with a stick. This is now, I've had 200 digits, and it took Tactical to get starting yours. And yeah.
So you do have a deal now for that, or
I can't say.
you can't say?
But kind of.
Work in progress.
It's, the answer is, we're in extremely serious talks with a few people. That's basically it. So I
But
wish I
in
could.
200 connections.
It took that. I mean, we have gotten other offers. They were just not out.
Right.
And then, again, have a checkup on your distributor. Look at what they've done in the past. Look them up on the Protect Yourself from Predatory Film Distributors Facebook group, which is run by Alex Ferrari, although I heard that they might be closing that with, I don't know. There are a couple of them. But most importantly, call their previous clients. I say this on stage all the time. Every time I'm closing with somebody, they say, hey, can I have a reference list? And I'm like, sure, here. But I actually tell them, like, I've told you, I know you were in the room, you should just call. That's includes me. Yeah. Like,
And research, do your due diligence.
yeah.
It's a cumbersome process. There's a lot of nits and crannies you got to calculate this.
Very, very true. So now, just general rules for negotiation, because I do, and get your question, Mike, this is the last slide. From a philosophical perspective, understand your position, try to have a realistic outlook on what your film is. Your film is probably not the next Broadway, so killing like it. Sorry, I'm teaching. I say that as the guy who signed Skidmore. So, yeah, it's probably not. You only have so much negotiation power. I like to think of it as different negotiation chips you can use and think about how you spend them. It's a long game, not a short one. Sometimes I've had films pop after like a year and a half on AVOD, just out of nowhere, and start making nearly 6 figures a quarter. And then the other, be practical, understand what other films have done to the best of your ability. Unfortunately, you're an information disadvantage. You're not pretty severe, because most of the data on these independent films is just not available. So you have to keep that in mind, which is why you need someone like a producer's rep, or a lawyer, or sometimes both. I actually consult with lawyers now, which is still weird to me. But I'll actually do deal point negotiation, and they'll do language, English.
The language, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a thing, then you always have to know how to pick your battles. And in the end, the most important thing you can do is focus on building relationships.